I have this tin hanging sign from Dollar Tree, and then I have these little heart wreaths that I did not get a chance to use during Valentine's Day, so I'm going to put them together and make a little shamrock project. Now, this is a flop to finish project, so hang in there with me and see if you think I turned it around. The paints I'll be using today are that truffle paint by Waverly, this moss chalk paint, some ink chalk paint, as well as some of this cinnamon colored acrylic paint and some actual cinnamon. I'm going to start by sponging on the truffle paint to give my tin just a base layer of some of this color to make it kind of look dirty. Then I'm going to layer on some of the moss green on top of that with my sponge. I'm just kind of highlighting different random areas on the corners, in the middle, the edge. Then I'm going to take my wet wipe and kind of smear this black paint around, focusing on the edges and corners, but then also dragging it across the middle of the sign. Then I'm going to take a little brown paint on my brush and dip it in that cinnamon and add that to some different parts of the sign as well to make it look a little corroded in those areas. And then once I get all those areas picked out, I'm going to use a little of this cinnamon acrylic paint to just go over that, seal it in a little bit, and highlight those areas. Then I'm also going to add a little to my twine to make it look a little grungy too. Next, I'm going to put my hearts together, so I'm just cutting a piece of rusty wire, and I'm going to use that to weave in and out those points at the bottom of the heart. I'm going to put those two together first, and then tie that third one on in the shape of a clover. It was a little tricky at first, but once I got it going my way, it was a lot easier. And then kind of last minute, I had the idea to wrap that twine around this dowel rod and make it a little springy piece at the bottom there as the stem. Now I'm going to work on my bow. I'm going to use my mini bow dabber for this one because I'm just going to be cutting really small strips of this fabric. I have this tan and green fabric, some coffee stained muslin, and then some of this black ticking. And I'm just cutting really tiny strips because I want it to be a pretty thin bow to match the overall design of my piece. Then I'm just going to layer in some simple shoestring type bows. I'm alternating the muslin, the black and ivory ticking, and then that green and tan plaid. And I'm just repeating that one more time so that I have 2 layers of those. Once I get that done, then I can tie my twine tight and flip it over, make a knot, and I'm going to leave that string long because in a minute I'm going to use that to tie to my little heart piece for my clover. And then I did go back later and add some hot glue to secure that really well. So here's what I have so far. The tails are long here, but I do go back and trim those later. And now I'm going to glue this whole piece to the front of my sign. And you can kind of tell here, I'm not quite liking how this is turning out at this point. I take a little of this antique wax and try to wipe that on with my wet wipe to see if that will help. And although it does age it some and give it more of a distressed look, it's still just not quite speaking to me just yet. So then I try a little of this distressing ink. I go around the edges and in the corners and kind of brush that onto some of those ridges of the tin and see if that helps a little bit, but it's still just not quite what I'm looking for. I kind of give up on that for a minute, and then I glued on this little just thin twine bow to the top of the other bow to give it a finishing touch, and here's what I have so far. I tried to take a few pictures and was just not liking this at all, so I took everything off, and here I am mixing some white chalk paint with some water just to kind of brush that over the top of what I have, and then I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe some of that back. And my hope is that it's just going to kind of show through lightly through that white paint. And I'm brushing on some of this green on top of that as well to give it kind of that green tint for St. Patrick's Day. And then I'm just kind of wiping it back a little bit so that you can see the grunging that I did underneath and reattaching my clover and the string to the top. And I think this time it turned out much better. You can still see the edges and the corners peeking through and through some of those brush strokes, the work that I did on the underneath. So thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. Just like in life, things happen, but you don't necessarily have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just make your situation better. I think I was able to turn it around pretty well, and it's actually a pretty sweet little piece. So I hope it inspired you to get a little crafty.